The Galactic Empire had expanded for thousands of years without challenge. Its doctrine was simple: classify, dominate, absorb. So when sensors picked up a cluster of unregistered warships entering Sector 17 Kappa, unannounced, unsignaled, unafraid, the High Command responded with protocol, not urgency. The ships were slow-moving, massive, and bore no recognizable transponder codes. Angular, black, and quiet. Primitive, concluded the analysts. Another backwater species stumbling into deep space. The kind of civilization the Empire had folded into itself 1,000 times before. Fleet Marshal Vorex, whose name carried fear across 5 constellations, reviewed the incoming data with mild amusement. These vessels didn't carry the telltale signatures of hyper-shielding, gravitic dampeners, or resonance drives. They didn't even transmit. Just sat in motionless formation between the outer rings of a resource moon and an orbital relay station. Vorex ordered a scout corvette to approach and initiate standard contact. It hailed them in all sanctioned trade dialects. No response. Static. Then silence. The corvette transmitted a general diplomatic greeting with full sensor pings, requesting identification and intention. Nothing. The ships remained motionless, as if time around them had stopped. The corvette circled the largest vessel, attempting closer scans. Every frequency it used returned scrambled or void readings. Its attempts to probe further were met not with countermeasures, but absence. As though the ship wasn't even there, just the outline of mass, uncooperative to physics. Intelligence masking. Crude but persistent. An officer commented, masking his uncertainty with smug condescension. Vorex nodded and authorized a Level 3 intimidation burst, a short-range plasma flare fired across the lead vessel's bow, meant to rattle nervous systems and prod instinctual fear. The energy bolt carved the blackness of space, glowing cobalt as it approached the silent ship. Then, just as it should have made visual contact, it disappeared. Not dispersed. Not deflected. Vanished. The Empire's bridge quieted. Sensors were rerun. No impact, no residue. The ship hadn't dodged. The bolt had simply ceased to exist mid-flight. It didn't register on the telemetry logs. No gravitational distortion, no magnetic field, just absence. Before questions could be formed, audio static bled into the Empire's open channels. Not erratic or spiking. Rhythmic. Almost patterned. Then it became clear. It wasn't noise. It was sound. Human vocalization. A laugh. Cold. Controlled. Singular. The same laugh emerged again, identical, this time from 2 more ships. A third followed. Then 5 more, perfectly synchronized. Not distorted, not modulated. Just raw sound. No words, no threats. Just laughter. Empire officers exchanged uneasy glances. Attempts to jam the signal failed. Routing protocols were overridden by a recursive loop. Even encrypted lines began echoing with the same sound. Admiral Vorex stiffened, teeth clenched. Are they mocking us? More attempts at communication were sent, warnings, demands, threats. The ships remained passive, weapons uncharged. But now, the formation changed. They didn't accelerate. They didn't burn fuel. They reappeared. What had been a symmetrical grid formation shifted, instantaneously, to a close surround of the corvette that had fired the initial contact shot. No transition. Just relocation. Panic bloomed on the scout's bridge. Evacuation commands blared. Before they could execute, their systems dimmed. Engines powered down. The hull integrity monitor stopped responding. No breach. Just absence. The corvette floated dead in space, untouched but inert. On the Empire's command ship, chaos seeped in under protocol. Experts scrambled for theories, advanced warp tech cloaking fields, AI warfare. None fit. One officer muttered what others wouldn't say aloud. They're not ships. There's something else. The laughter stopped. Replaced by silence again. As if that brief intrusion had been for amusement, or instruction. The Empire's fleet watched helplessly as the corvette, once the pride of frontier diplomacy, began to rotate slowly, end over end, its artificial gravity crippled. No explosions. No theatrics. Just systematic shutdown, as if the humans had plucked the concept of function from it. Vorax issued a system-wide alert. But for all his decades of battle, he couldn't describe the threat, or even prove that one existed. All he could say was that they had approached with confidence, and been answered with indifference. And that indifference was worse than hostility. The humans had seen them, heard them, and chosen not to speak. They just laughed. The Empire responded with precision. Within hours of the corvette's silent destruction, 20 warships warped into formation. Dreadnoughts bristling with singularity lances, quantum shields shimmering with layered pulses. No mercy protocols were loaded. This was no longer a diplomatic oversight. It was to be a public correction. The primitives would learn their place beneath the banners of the Galactic throne. Fleet Command locked weapons. Orders were issued. Target the largest vessel, show dominance, instill fear. A full plasma barrage fired in unison, aimed squarely at the angular behemoth that had dared ignore protocol. The energy lit space with color and fury. Yet nothing landed. Not even a glimmer of contact. Each shot vanished mid-trajectory, blinked out of existence meters before impact. Not deflected. Not absorbed. Gone. System logs registered anomalies too erratic for comprehension. Space-time dips, artificial lensing, decayed patterns that didn't match any known field. Weapons crews stared at their interfaces, unsure if they had fired at all. Then the voice returned. No scream, no broadcast. Just a whisper, deep and flat, a laugh. Identical to the one before. Then another. Then all of them again. Unmodulated. Inhuman in its uniformity. A mechanic rhythm of derision, echoing in every frequency, hijacking the Empire's internal comms, replacing all signals. Fleet Command tried purging the interference, but every attempt triggered recursive feedback loops that crashed entire subsystems. Across the fleet, sensor feeds began warping. Ship outlines twisted in impossible geometry, flickering between positions that defied light lag. Gravimetric readings spiked erratically. Tactical AIs failed predictive models. The human ships were not just jamming scans, they were rewriting detection logic. One Imperial cruiser spun its long-range cannons toward a second target, but before it could fire, a human vessel was already behind it. Not moving, displaced. Instantaneously. From 400,000 kilometers forward to point-blank rear. The Empire's war doctrine demanded counterattack. But target locks couldn't hold. Guidance systems trembled. Power routes flickered in and out like candlelight in wind. Crew members reported auditory hallucinations, whispers in their own languages, memories surfacing unbidden. Some collapsed in silence, eyes wide. Then it escalated. One by one, key systems aboard multiple ships shut down. Not through impact or infiltration, by denial of function. Core drives went inert. Cooling systems spiked with no rise in heat. Hull sensors looped phantom data. Technicians found access ports melted, not by heat, but as though time had corroded them instantly. Human ships began to reposition again. Not in attack, not aggressively. But deliberately, surrounding Empire vessels in loose orbits, observing, measuring. They didn't open fire. They didn't speak. Just watched as controls slipped further away from the once invincible fleet. Psychological rupture spread like disease. Commanders demanded new orders. Analysts failed to explain what was happening. High-ranking officers accused their own crews of sabotage. A captain shot his first mate for insubordination born from pure panic. Protocols frayed. Cohesion dissolved. In the heart of the flagship, Fleet Marshal Vorax stared at a blank tactical screen. Dozens of enemy ships, all present, all untouched, yet untouchable. No pattern. No demands. No weaknesses. A single transmission finally broke the silence. No encryption. No signature. Just audio. You shot first. The voice was human. Calm. Clear. Accented in no recognizable dialect. Then another laugh followed, shorter, sharper. The kind that comes after certainty. After victory, not hope. Empire Command collapsed under its own weight. Targeting was useless. Mobility compromised. Internal systems corrupted by unseen processes. And still, not a single human weapon had fired. Not one hull breach. Not one casualty. Because this wasn't war. Not to them. To the humans, this was a demonstration. They had let the Empire come in strength, unleash their best, declare intent, and act on it. And they'd replied with nothing but silence, manipulation, and a sound. Not of fear. Not of pain. Just laughter. The Empire had come to enforce dominance. And left without certainty they'd ever understood the rules. Humanity's arrival wasn't a beginning. It was the result of centuries spent on the edge of extinction. Long before the Empire ever detected them, humans had already transcended their own chaos. Not by unity or peace, but by adaptation, raw, brutal, relentless. They hadn't built a civilization to survive the galaxy. They had built a response. Their vessels weren't warships in the traditional sense. They were constructs born from necessity, layered in materials without known origin, shaped by minds not entirely human. Engines weren't placed, they were grown into the frame, fused with computational cores older than any alien empire. These ships didn't operate on protocols. They followed intent. No one on the Empire's side knew that every major galactic conflict humanity studied, it learned from. Not to emulate, but to improve upon. Where the Empire valued control, humans obsessed over unpredictability. No two ships were alike. Every internal system constantly evolved. Hardware reconfigured mid-flight. AI matrices self-mutated based on threat input. There was no pattern to break, no signature to trace. Inside these vessels, no organic commanders sat on thrones. Instead, neural clone minds, filtered from humanity's most calculating strategists, were paired with silent crews trained not in obedience, but in autonomous action. There was no hierarchy. Each unit was both soldier and command. Each system a redundant whole. The death of one part never interrupted the function of the greater structure. The Empire's assumption that humans were disorganized, new, untested, had already collapsed. The truth was worse. Humans didn't want territory. Didn't crave acknowledgement. They didn't broadcast because they didn't need dialogue. Every action was a test. Every silence a measure of reaction. When the Empire's corvette had first been disabled, humans had already mapped every reaction. When the fleet fired, they had anticipated the trajectory, the command chains, the tactical delays. They didn't adapt mid-battle. They had simulated it all years prior. Even the laughter hadn't been for show. It was a calculated intrusion, selected to produce maximum destabilization without engaging kinetic force. Human psychological warfare operated on a principle the Empire had never considered: certainty leads to collapse faster than destruction. When a civilization no longer trusts what it sees, it loses cohesion. And once cohesion fractures, no weapon is needed. The Empire's species couldn't understand this because they had evolved in dominance. Their enemies had always been lesser. But humanity came from struggle. Every advancement had been clawed from the void. Every success preceded by failure. That experience was distilled into every system, every protocol, every ship. One message had been sent after the second engagement. Simple. Unambiguous. A list. Planetary designations. Systems once enslaved, stripped, terraformed against native will. Every name matched locations the Empire thought buried beneath bureaucracy and redacted history. Accompanying the list were new coordinates. Nothing more. But those coordinates correlated with weaknesses: fuel depots, relay arrays, automated shipyards. Their vulnerabilities weren't just known, they were documented in patterns only accessible from internal command files. Files never transmitted beyond secure channels. And yet humans had them. That was the true revelation. Not just the superiority in technology, but the precision of knowledge. The humans hadn't guessed. They had observed. For years. Possibly longer. The Empire's systems, ships, and society had been monitored without detection. Their behavioral responses modeled. Their flaws indexed. And through it all, humanity had remained silent. Because they weren't looking for permission. They weren't seeking validation. They were assessing. By the time the Empire realized this, the question was no longer whether humanity was a threat, it was why they had waited. And the answer was devastating. Humans didn't act out of fear. They acted out of decision. When the Empire shot first, it didn't provoke a war. It triggered a verdict. Not a declaration of hostility. Just a conclusion. The Empire prepared for retaliation, but it never came. The human ships didn't advance. They didn't broadcast demands or initiate further contact. They simply vanished. One moment encircling the fleet, the next absent from all sensors. Not cloaked. Not hidden. Gone. The fleet hung in space, weapons hot, systems straining for targets that no longer existed. There was no battle. No damage to repair. No casualties. Only silence and the creeping realization that nothing made sense. Hours later, entire outposts across the border fringe began going dark. Communication ceased without warning. Satellite networks dropped offline. Long-range drones returning from patrols arrived corrupted, software blank, memory cores wiped clean of their last movements. At first, the Empire assumed a technical failure. But as the blackout spread, a pattern emerged. The systems going dark weren't random. They were critical. Fuel hubs. Logistics nodes. Relay centers that served as arteries for empire-wide supply lines. Then came the internal failures. Secure archives began corrupting from within. Fleet records disappeared. Navigation data reverted to decades-old files. AI cores entered recursive loops and shut down. Entire battleships returned to dock reporting no memory of the past 48 hours. Some crews spoke of seeing things, fleeting shapes outside the hull, impossible shadows shifting across control panels. No intrusions. No breaches. Just unease. The psychological strain cracked faster than expected. Colonies received garbled messages, fragments of laughter mixed with audio from Imperial broadcasts decades old. Citizens panicked. Protests erupted across trade worlds, demanding answers from leadership that now had none. Military governors issued curfews. Civilian AIs crashed under data load as misinformation saturated every channel. No one claimed responsibility. No one understood how the chaos spread so precisely. Within high command, fear sharpened into desperation. Naval admirals debated declaring full martial law. Others urged retreat from contested sectors. But no decision held long enough to act. Every time they tried to organize a counter-response, systems failed. Orders didn't arrive. Ships jumped to wrong coordinates. Supply convoys reached their destinations empty, their contents unexplainably gone. Whispers began among the officer corps. Not of war, but judgment. That the humans hadn't disappeared. They were simply finished observing. Then the defections began. Not entire ships, but key personnel. Specialists. Engineers. Communications officers. All vanishing from secure posts. They didn't escape. They were taken. Translocated without force. Those few who returned claimed they'd spoken with no one, seen no faces, just light and sound, then awakening hours later with implants removed, memories partially erased, voices still echoing in their minds. Not commands. Warnings. Fear became institutional. A captain discharged his reactor over a civilian port, convinced it had been compromised. A logistics director sealed himself inside a vault, attempting to isolate the central nexus. He never re-emerged. His staff found only a single phrase etched into the wall. You were watched. Military coordination fell apart. Systems once synchronized across light years failed to align. Star bases remained idle. Drones stopped responding. And everywhere, the humans remained unseen. Yet their influence was unmistakable. Entire star systems fell into silence. No battles. No explosions. Just darkness. Within the capital, paranoia overtook planning. Ministers blamed each other for data breaches that couldn't be traced. Intelligence divisions collapsed under contradicting reports. Even internal surveillance began feeding false footage, officials caught on record saying things they never remembered saying. Trust vanished. In desperation, the Empire broadcast a universal ceasefire. A plea, not a command. It went unanswered. Not rejected. Not acknowledged. Across the stars, species long enslaved began rising. Uprisings flared with precise timing, coordinated in ways never seen before. They struck garrisons, took orbital stations, jammed Imperial signals. They moved as if guided. As if prepared. The Empire didn't fall to an attack. It unraveled. Piece by piece. And at the center of it all was absence. No invading army. No enemy fleet. No declaration. Just the knowledge that the humans had been there. And decided not to stay. In the aftermath, the galaxy held its breath. Systems once under Imperial control now drifted in political limbo. Old alliances crumbled. New factions rose, not in celebration but in fear. Across every quadrant, questions spread faster than any fleet. Where had the humans gone? Why had they come at all? And would they return? No answers surfaced. Only stories, scattered accounts, distorted by fear, repeated in whispers. The few surviving Imperial officers who had witnessed the encounter firsthand refused to speak publicly. Those who did were dismissed as unstable. But behind closed doors, leaders of other civilizations studied their words with reverence and dread. Human vessels that didn't move, but appeared. Technology that defied all known physics. Systems disabled without damage. Minds broken without interrogation. And above all, judgment passed without emotion. Not long after, entire civilizations began altering their policies. Militaries were overhauled. Aggressive expansion projects were quietly shelved. Empires scaled back patrols along borders they once claimed without question. New protocols were developed, not for defense against war, but for detection of signs that humanity might be near. Some species turned inward, attempting to erase histories of conquest and subjugation, as if editing the past could shield them from human scrutiny. Others built elaborate monuments in deep space, beacons of peace, filled with messages begging forgiveness for actions long past. None of these received a response. That silence was worse than any threat. A few brave scholars tried to trace the humans, to find the origin of those ships. They found empty systems. Dead stars surrounded by megastructures far beyond known construction capability. Entire regions of space, once mapped, now returned garbled readings, as if rewritten. No signals. No life. Just emptiness shaped with purpose. Rumors flourished. That humanity had moved beyond physical existence. That they lived within folded dimensions. That the ships weren't vessels but avatars, interfaces for something incomprehensible. Some even claimed the humans had no homeworld, that Earth was a myth. Others swore they had encountered remnants, brief signals, altered gravitational patterns, strange pulses in the void. None could confirm. All feared they might be right. The laughter lingered. Not audibly, but culturally. It entered languages as a phrase. The silent laugh used to describe a moment when power shifts without cause, when the rules break without being challenged. It became a warning. Children were taught never to speak arrogantly of strength. Soldiers trained with the knowledge that overwhelming force meant nothing against the unknown. Diplomats learned humility. No official entity ever declared humanity a threat. No war was recorded. No treaty signed. But their presence reshaped the galaxy more effectively than any invasion. They didn't destroy the Empire. They revealed its fragility. Time passed. New empires rose, careful not to repeat the arrogance of the last. But even generations later, caution remained. Deep space probes were retrieved at the first sign of strange interference. Colonial ventures avoided sectors with certain patterns and gravitational drift. Ships that encountered unexplained anomalies were quietly decommissioned. Not out of failure. Out of fear. In hidden chambers, some leaders still kept recordings, clipped audio of that first laugh. A sound without anger. Without effort. Just inevitability. They played it during emergency simulations, not to prepare, but to remember. And in that remembrance, a new galactic order stabilized, not through fear of conquest, but through understanding of insignificance. Humanity had not asked for loyalty, trade, or submission. They had not spoken of peace or threat. They had observed, calculated, acted. Then left. The final lesson was the most haunting. Humanity wasn't seeking war. They were testing civilizations. And those that failed would not be destroyed. They would be exposed. No one knew if the humans watched still. But no one doubted they could. And so, the galaxy moved forward, carefully, quietly, under the shadow of a species that needed no throne to rule.